This is a test. A test by the prophets. They want to see if I'm worthy of the role they've given me as First Minister and Kai. I will not fail them. I will stop Shakaar by any means necessary.
Your men are on their way even as we speak.
There's still time to work this out.
Have the president step down and call for elections.
That's not gonna happen.
Then I look forward to meeting your men.
Good day and welcome to Battlespace 9, Episode 4, featuring Deep Space Nine's Shakaar and Battlestar Galactica's Bastille Day. I'm Carl, and these are our guests.
Hi, I'm Nathan Comstock. I was in a playwriting group with Carl, and hopefully will be again.
Catalyze.
It kind of stopped happening because plays stopped happening because COVID, but
COVID.
yeah, I've been watching Star Trek since I was a tiny baby.
I'm Jonah Comstock. I'm Nathan's twin brother. I'm also a longtime Star Trek fan. Deep Space Nine is my favorite. I see the true light there. My two favorite television shows are Deep Space Nine and Gilmore Girls. So one of these days I'll do a podcast like this about those two shows, maybe.
That's cool.
Well, they're both about single parents living at no.
That's true.
I'm new to Battlestar Galactica. I've watched this episode and all the ones before it, and none of the ones to come, although I do know I've absorbed some of the details about it through osmosis. So,
You know, I can't believe it when Lorelai broke up with Luke in order to date the prophets.
Yeah.
That was totally mean. It's like, what are you doing, Lorelai? Before we get started, maybe I want to congratulate you, Nathan, on your Kickstarter and your audio series.
Electromance. Yeah, it's going well. Season 2 is going to take a really long time, and I've just sort of accepted that. We didn't raise anywhere near our goal, but we raised enough. And yeah, scripts are all written. I've recorded the first episode. I'm in the process of recording the second episode and dialogue editing the first one. But yeah, I'm home. I'm shooting for early 2023, which is also what we're shooting for season 4 of Solutions to Problems, which is my other audio drama, which is more science fiction-y and comedy-y. So hopefully, I guess they'll both be coming out then, if all goes to plan.
Great. Where can we find those things?
So Electromancy is at electromancypod.com. Solutions to Problems is at stppodcast.com. I recommend Apollo if you listen to a lot of audio dramas. But whatever.
Jonah, do you do writing as well?
I'm a journalist for my day job, so I do some writing there. I also have been involved in the poetry scene in Boston. I'm not writing a ton right now. And I am a singer-songwriter, including in a duo with Nathan. We perform under the name Pirate Not Included. I think we're playing a few farmers markets this summer if you're in the Boston area, but we're not super active right now.
I did write a Deep Space Nine song, actually. It's the first song I've written in like 3 years. It's about Garrick and Bashir.
Excellent.
You can find me on Twitter at j2theona, or at Jonah Comstock, but that's my work Twitter, and you're only going to get pharma content there. So,
Farmer content?
Pharmaceutical content.
No, I don't write about farmers.
Nice. Let us get started with today's theme, which are People's Champions.
We are, in fact, going to be talking about farmers.
Yes.
Yeah, I wrote in one of the very small number of notes that I wrote, is this Bajor's version of the Whiskey Rebellion? ?
That's an excellent reference point. Let me just tell you that in Shakaar, Major Kira is on assignment from Kai Wynn, who is the leading candidate for First Minister of Bajor, to get some farm equipment back from her old Resistance colleague and war hero Shakaar. Shakaar just got these soil reclamators, and he's not going to let him go, even though he still likes Kira. She gets him to agree to a negotiation, but when she reports back to Wynn, Wynn just sends out the military and declares martial law. Betrayed, Kira joins up with Shakaar, and they go on the lam with some more old resistance buddies. They get cornered, but the people in the government's army are also old resistance buddies. Since none of them want to shoot each other, they talk it out. They decide Shakaar should run for first minister. Knowing she can't beat a war hero, Kai Wynn concedes, civil war is averted, and now Bashir is the one who's in the zone. What made you think of the Whiskey Rebellion, Nathan?
I don't know, just that Bajor is kind of like in the early phases of forming its own government, and, you know, it's still a provisional government.
They often refer to Deep Space Nine as kind of a Western, and I don't really see it most of the time, but this may be one of the most Westernist episodes. You know, just the idea that you get into like these groups of like 4 or 5 people, and among yourselves decide whether it's going to be civil war or like a political campaign.
Yeah,
is interesting.
Well, I think the Bajoran politics episodes occupy an interesting spot in the DS9 canon. I think you will rarely find someone who says that those are their favorites, and but they're not bad. You know, it's nobody talks about them the way that some people talk about Ferengi episodes or something. They're just sort of this other show that's going on, and there's a lot of it at the beginning, and then as the show goes on, they check in on it less and less. And this is sort of in the waning days of Bajoran politics episodes in some ways, even though Shakaar goes on to be a fairly major, if somewhat forgettable character.
Well, yeah, I think that's the thing, honestly. Like, Shakaar and Bareil, who are both Major Kira's love interests and are both kind of like also are anchors to the world of Bajoran politics, are boring characters. And the actors who they chose for them, I mean, no offense to those actors, but like they're just extremely like white bread and beige. And it's like this actually, I think it could have been people's favorite episodes if they had written those characters better and chosen actors with a little more charisma. But
in this episode, I actually liked Shakaar. I felt like there was chemistry between him and Kira. I understood why they kept him on. There's some really cute banter between them in the first scene where she meets him. And I was like, yeah, this guy seems cool. So I bought into it. But then I know that down the road that
you changed your hair
fades away or something. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I felt like the guy without the arm and they're not married, but Lupaza and
that's Pharrell.
I felt like they were instantly more interesting and more likable characters than Shakaar. But I don't know, maybe that's just me.
They come back one time too, I think, to get killed off.
Yeah.
They do get killed. God rest. I'm really into Pharrell and Lupaza. They remind me of like somebody's sort of boomer uncles. Mm-hmm. You know, they're getting middle aged, but they still know how to party. Like, you know, they definitely have a cool record collection in their rec room.
Fun, slight digression fact. Mm-hmm. The episode where they come back and subsequently die, I got to meet Nana Visitor in a Zoom for backing the Voyager documentary, and I got to ask her a question, and I asked her what scene that she was most proud of, and it was from that episode, Wrong's Darker Than Death or Night.
That's a good one.
Yeah, the scene where she's arguing with the Cardassian who's deformed.
What did she say she liked about that?
She said it was just a really difficult acting challenge because she was like fake pregnant and she was on her back and she couldn't really see anything, and it was this like heady, dramatic scene, but she is sort of doing it pretty much blind, and in a super uncomfortable position. So,
should we talk about Kai Wynn? She is just the ultimate love to hate, isn't she? I mean,
she's an incredible villain. Yeah, I feel like if it wasn't for Dukat, Kai Wynn would be like the ultimate Star Trek bad guy.
I love the scenes with Louise Fletcher and Nana Visitor, especially. Kira's hatred for Kai Wynn is like right on her face the whole time, and Wynn is, by contrast, is just so like she is so good at that one inflection that she maintains at all times. So like Kira is sort of too honest, mm-hmm. And so it always feels like Kai Wynn could kind of just play her like a fiddle. As someone who claims to have loved him, I'm surprised you didn't know
that was brutal.
It's like, oh.
And Louise Fletcher is so good because she plays the mask and what's under the mask seamlessly. So you see her and you think she's just maintaining this perfect cadence of "I'm a nun, aren't I great?" But you can also everything she's actually saying under that comes through. I feel like it just wasn't her big break. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Yeah, she won an Oscar for it.
Won an Oscar for playing Nurse Ratched. I have not seen it, but I imagine there's some of the same stuff going on there, where she's got, what she's supposed to sound like as a professional, and then what she's really, what's really under the surface.
One thing I love about the dynamic between Kira and Wynn is that Kai Wynn has all the trappings of faith, but she's incredibly self-serving when it comes down to it. And Major Kira is, a soldier. She's crass. She's, but she has the most genuine faith of any Bajoran that we meet. She's a true believer of the prophets. And I just really like that portrayal, that Opaka was a true believer as well,
But Kai Wynn may or may... I do think Kai Wynn actually believes in the prophets. And I kind of buy the thing they set up later, that Kai Wynn is a lot of what explains her is that she's so pissed off that they've never spoken to her and she's never had an orb experience, which is really fascinating when you think about the fact that the prophets aren't actual outside of time aliens. So there is an element of self-fulfilling prophecy here, where the prophets could have chosen to speak to her, but they didn't because she's not worthy, but she's not worthy because they didn't speak to her. There's a whole loop, and all that it never really gets explored, but it's all there in the subtext. Why is Kai Wynn the way she is? Ultimately, it doesn't matter for our heroes. What matters is he is the way she is, and they have to deal with it. And at the bottom of everything, she's a power seeker, All the villains, except maybe Wayoon, are motivated, by power hungriness.
I do remember a scene where she lambasts Kira for saying essentially, you resistance fighters think you were the only ones. I would have been, guillotined if they had found me. And it is kind of interesting to think that mask she wears was built under occupation as well. Maybe she's not too different from the founders in a way. Maybe Kai Wynn is sort of, I have to control the world for the prophets to make sure that the occupation will not come back.
What you said made me think of the idea of collective trauma, right? The occupation was a collective trauma for the Bajoran people. And we've been hearing a lot about that term in terms of COVID-19, being a first kind of collective trauma that really we've gone through as a country or a world in a long time. But every single person on Bajor was affected by the occupation, and all of this inter-Bajoran conflict is set against that backdrop, which ultimately saves the day here, because that's how the farmers and the soldiers end up not starting a war. But even Kai Wynn is not immune to that. She is who she is partly because of the occupation.
One more thing I want to say about Kai Wynn that you reminded me of. It's interesting because early on in the episode, when she's talking to Kira about Barial, and she says, he would not have wanted the credit for this. And she's using the story of the peace treaty with Cardassia to bolster herself. So she understands the power of stories, right? But that's also the power that ultimately undoes her at the end of the episode, right? It's not Shakaar's martial prowess. His little band of farmers doesn't defeat the militia. He defeats her with a story.
The war hero beats the cloistered diplomat nun.
And I want to come back to that when we talk about Galactica, because I think that same sort of aspect is present there. But
yeah, well spotted, Carl, by the way, picking these two episodes to complement each other. At first I was like,
oh, thank you.
I don't quite see it, but then I was like, oh wow, I really see it. So
This is what's great about watching these things in concert, because I've called it a Ronald D. Moore cast, but that's not really even quite it, because I don't think Ronald D. Moore was even on the show at this point. Oh, he was on, but it's Ira Stephen Bear who was the boss, and a lot of this was set before him anyway. This idea of science fiction that is sort of about how to make a society and to interact with different societies is interesting.
Are you open to changing gears in a weird way, like briefly partway through this podcast? Because I think it would be amazing when you get to the Pegasus arc to use Equinox from Voyager instead of a Deep Space Nine episode.
Ooh. If I could go on a third tangent, I did celebrate sort of this new podcast by buying this. It's a model of Deep Space Nine, but unwanted. They also sent me a model of the Equinox with the warp nacelles broken off. Yeah.
I didn't even know they made a micro machine of the Equinox.
Eaglemoss makes every damn ship.
Yeah. Like literally every ship.
Amazing.
Like a shuttle that appeared for like 2 seconds in the motion picture.
Because Ronald D. Moore was on Voyager for like a minute, and then he got pissed off and left, apparently.
But, even if Ronald Moore wasn't involved in all of the Deep Space Nine episodes that you talk about, like, Deep Space Nine in general was so formative for him. And I think he's talked about how Battlestar was his kind of chance to do the stuff that he wanted to do on Deep Space Nine, but they wouldn't let him. So,
yeah.
Well, it was really the stuff he wanted to do on Voyager, but they wouldn't let him. I think that the Bashir and O'Brien B-plot, even though it has very little substance or screen time, actually dovetails very nicely with the A-plot.
Really?
Yeah, because it's also about stories, and it's also about legends, right? O'Brien has gotten in the zone playing darts, and he's kind of become a legend, and he, has to decide when he injures himself how important is that legacy to him, and he decides ultimately it's not that important because it's just darts and who the heck cares. But I find sometimes the comic B plot has a thematic connection to the serious A plot, and I love it when that happens, even if it's like
this one
like that.
Feels like reaching a little bit, but if it worked for you, I'm glad.
Well, I think the problem is it's about darts, one of the most comical sports. If this were a Western, this would probably be the plot of, O'Brien. Maybe O'Brien is the last gunslinger. Like if instead of darts, it was about like shooting a gun, something big and American like that. Like that would make sense as a Western plot.
Or lassoing cattle.
Yeah, lassoing. There you go. I kind of wondered whether it was even possible to break your arm in that way. But I sort of feel like the older I get, the more I am told that I could break my arm by doing literally anything. So I'm accepting.
I thought the twist was going to be that it was an act, like that he did it to get out of Quark's expectations, and that Bashir was just lying. I was actually surprised when it was when he did actual surgery.
Yeah, the only other thing I have on my notes sheet now is the brief hair and beard Sisko period.
Yes. For this episode, and I think Explorers and one other, he has the hair and the beard or something.
Once he gets that Spencer for hire look, it's like, I've arrived.
Yeah.
I'm a captain now. None of this commander crap.
I will say, the reason they needed a B plot in this episode was because the A plot really was only using Kira out of the main cast. Odo gets a scene. Yeah. Sisko gets a scene, and it's very good. But other than that, they were just like, we can't have a show without any of our...
Also, can we talk about how Kira just completely goes AWOL from her duties on the station?
Yeah.
And Sisko's just I haven't seen Major Kira in weeks. Like, what? She's your first officer? Question mark.
You know what it is? Sisko is really good at work-life balance. Sure, he expects a lot, but when you're off the clock, you're on your own time. He won't be contacting you to remind him what the password is to stuff.
Well, Major Kira works for Kai Wynn at this point, right? As much as she works for Sisko. Sisko is her commanding officer, true. But Kai Wynn is the first minister, who I assume is the commander-in-chief of the Bajoran forces. Though I don't know that.
That's true.
For sure.
she was the one who dispatched the army. So I think you're right. I think she must be Kira's commander-in-chief by that standard.
And if this were Battlestar, they probably would play with that, right? Because that chain of command stuff is really important in Battlestar Galactica.
Let's talk about actually that Avery Brooks Louise Fletcher scene a little bit, because it occurred to me like that scene is almost implacability off between two great big actors, because like I really felt like the subtext for Sisko there was, I'm not flinching, you can't make me flinch, I know you're going to try to make me flinch like you make Kira flinch.
So Kai Wynn is the most powerful person on Bajor at this point. She's the most powerful person on an entire planet. And I know Star Trek is bad at scale, and so they don't really necessarily convey that. But one way to read that scene is the biggest fish in the small pond walks into Sisko's office, and as far as Sisko's concerned, she's just a colonial. She's not even on her scale that all day she's in the Vedic Assembly dealing with people who she's completely figured out how to overpower with her will. And then she comes to Deep Space Nine and she meets her match because she doesn't have that inherent power that she has on Bajor. And so she tries to manipulate Sisko the way that you assume she's very used to manipulating anyone and everyone to get her way. And he just kind of says, well, that doesn't seem like a very smart idea, does it?
Exactly. He's so calm.
So I was just looking up the transcript. If Bajor cannot depend on the Federation, we'll withdraw our application for membership. That would be an unfortunate overreaction on your part.
I know, it's so cool.
It's not just that he calls her bluff.
It's almost Spock.
He doesn't even think about calling her bluff. He knows she doesn't have... He knows she's overplayed her hand there, and he's not even giving it the courtesy of a second thought.
Yeah, it's completely rope-a-dope.
Does Wynn even actually want Bajor to join the Federation?
Oh, she's opposed.
So, like, even the carrot that she's dangling is, like, total bullshit, right?
Yeah. She is good in that Machiavellian way of pushing situations where she either wins a lot or she wins a little.
But she probably knows that Sisko's job is to get Bajor to join the Federation. That's, like, one of his primary objectives from Starfleet, and that's not a secret. So, so whether she wants Bajor to join the Federation or not, she knows that threatening to take that away she thinks that will scare Sisko because she thinks Sisko is afraid of his own bosses. But Sisko's really never given any evidence that he's afraid of his own bosses at all.
No.
I think he loves this job because he doesn't have to be accountable on a day-to-day basis to any admirals.
I believe that completely. He is the most aloof captain, arguably. To speak about like the trauma he went through. Like, my wife died in combat. What more can happen to me?
Well,
all I might as well do is just sort of try to make these things go smooth that I'm responsible for.
Also, like, after the pilot, Starfleet has no power whatsoever to replace Sisko as commander of Deep Space Nine.
Right.
Because he's literally
the
like the emissary of the prophets. Whoever else they bring in isn't going to have like remotely the same opportunity to connect with and influence the Bajorans as he is. Plus they'll probably piss off the Bajorans by replacing him. So like he's got the ultimate job security at this point. Like he'd have to do a lot to screw it up.
They don't really address that when the station changes hands during the war. They don't address the fact that the Bajorans have lost their emissary. And he's off being a soldier.
That's true.
There's a lot going on in those 5 episodes, so it's forgivable. But...
Yeah, that's a good. Well, Bajorans are patient. They've been waiting 10,000 years for the Celestial Temple. That's probably enough for them, I suspect. So I was kind of curious. Have you guys ever been in the zone?
I think yes, in video games, but also in poker. I play a little poker when I'm on the road. I play in casinos sometimes, and very much there's a feeling of being in the zone when you win a bunch of hands in a row, and of course the best thing to do is to stop playing. Take your money.
You gotta know when to fold. What was your best poker story?
Oh gosh, I don't know.
Okay.
Well,
want to keep
so
it
recently
quiet,
actually is a pretty fun time. I did not get in the zone, But I was in Montana with some college friends, and there's a lot of poker there because a lot of the land is on reservations, and there's have very lax laws. You can have a poker game anywhere, whereas most places, you've got to be in a casino. So we were at a bar just having dinner, and they had poker tables in the back of the bar. So a couple of us, me and my friend Jake, decided we were going to go play for a little bit, and it's just not the crowd I'm accustomed to playing against, because these are like Bozeman, Montana locals. We were off of the main drag, so like, real like cowboys and kind of rough characters. And Jake went in really big, really fast, and got 4 of a kind. So it was like, our friends who pulled us away when we were up money, which was very good of them, joked that we were hustling them. But really, we just got very lucky. But the rough customers were a little pissed off. They were like, "Who are these Yankees?" And I was wearing a cowboy hat that I had just bought as a tourist, and so I really looked like a Yankee rube.
Oh boy!
And
let me see if I can remember. Were you doing like the tourist thing where you wore the hat back, or are you doing the Texas thing where you wear it down?
No, totally touristy and
okay, so they were,
but they underestimated.
I'm sure.
Me, so
that's how you play it. That's how you play. I bet all of those rough customers you mentioned were more intimidating than Shakaar.
Possibly.
Now that I think about it.
That reminds me of a story, but it has nothing whatsoever to do with Deep Space Nine.
Okay. Do you have anything you want to weigh in on Zone?
Well, it does kind of a little bit. Actually, no, it doesn't. Never mind.
Okay. I just realized that I have never been in the Zone myself, because everything I am good at just seems like really hard.
I get
so someday I'm going to be in the Zone.
What about with writing? I feel
I was going to say I get in the zone with writing, but that's like a different meaning of in the zone.
Right. Well, that's the thing. Like I guess I've never like gone into a bar and like written a whole big thing of text and then gone to like pick up a beer and like order beers for the entire round and then went back to my script. I've never been in the zone in an ostentatious way.
Okay, so this story actually is relevant. Sorry.
Okay.
All right, so I was on tour with a choir that I was in high school, the Indianapolis Youth Chorale. So we had just done a concert and we were still in our concert outfits. So the men were in tuxes, the women were in these like black sparkly dresses. And I don't even remember how this happened, but my friend Amanda and I went into the hotel bar where a bunch of dudes were playing pool. And I did not know that Amanda is really super good at pool, but she is. And so she just like challenged these guys to a game of pool. And they're just like kind of bro-ish looking dudes in flannels. She's this like tiny Filipino woman in like a sparkly dress with her makeup like completely done, just completely owning them at pool. So I was not in the zone, but Amanda definitely was, and it was hilarious. Because they were like,
it is nice when your loved ones are in the zone.
She's like 5 feet tall.
So you don't have that pressure of this.
That's important to this story.
One thing I forgot to mention about Shakaar, I guess when they conceived him and described him to the actor, he was described as a Clint Eastwood type, which kind of makes me laugh. When I heard that, I realized that like I was kind of annoyed by how gravelly the actor was making his voice. Like, "Hello, Kira."
Yeah, he may have been trying a little too hard to be Clint Eastwood type.
Edward James almost is more of a Clint Eastwood type than Shakaar.
Yes, he is. If anything, he looked like mini Michael Douglas to me.
And later on, they do get to do the fun where they riff on... Deep Space Nine is always riffing on things, but the one where they riff on the bodyguard with Shakaar and Oda.
Yeah. That's actually the episode I thought this was when you told me about it. And then I watched it.
This
is
like
no,
the Lovelorn.
Yeah,
this is like the Lovelorn one where Shakar's like, "So Odo, do you think she loves me?"
Yeah, exactly. Odo is assigned to protect Shakaar, while Shakaar and Kira are just starting their relationship, and Odo realizes he loves Kira, and it's got a great Odo and Quark moment.
Speaking of Odo, he says something in this episode that kind of annoys me, where he's like, "With solids, when you give them freedom of choice, sometimes they make the wrong choice." And it's like, okay, Odo, like your species is literally colonizing an entire quadrant here. Let's have some humility. Let's check your privilege, Odo. That's all.
Odo is a low-key fascist, like a lot. Like he says things like that. Like,
I guess so.
Like we should all be glad Odo isn't in charge.
Yeah.
Love him, but
yeah. You know what's interesting though? 2 weeks ago on the show we did In the Pale Moonlight, and in that episode, Odo is the one sticking up for Quark's civil liberties. So you're right. I mean, most of the time he's a fascist, but every so often he makes sure.
Well, he's obsessed with the rules, and the rules apply equally to everyone. Like that's Odo's like mantra. Yeah. Like if Odo was a character in Star Trek Adventures, like that would be his defining value.
But like, he doesn't like rules that are applied to him
equally to everyone.
To everyone.
Because when Starfleet,
I have my own.
Starfleet comes along and tries to give him rules on how to do his job, he's not happy about that.
But he hates Quark. But Quark is entitled to these protections under the law, and no one is gonna.
Maybe it's like when he's operating under like a democratic government, he's the fascist, and when he's operating under a fascist government, he's the ACLU stickler. Maybe that's his thing. Maybe it's like, I'm here to represent whoever's not in the room.
Kind of. I mean, yeah, we think about him under the Cardassians. I'll buy that.
Yeah. That's how he was able, that must be how he's able to maintain the trust of the Cardassians and the Bajorans.
So he's really just a nonconformist or
he's a Unitarian, yeah.
Odo's probably my favorite character in Deep Space Nine. Like, it's really close between like 8 different people, but I think if I had to like,
it's an 8-way tie.
Give it to one by a small edge. It's Odo. I just love him so much.
Battlestar Galactica Bastille Day. Solving last week's water crisis is going to take a lot of hard labor. Luckily, there are 1,500 prisoners on the ship called the Astral Queen, who have been sentenced to hard labor. Apollo travels to the prison ship with some backup and asks for the prisoners' help. But one of those prisoners is political activist Tom Zarek, a well-known and controversial dissident, and he has organized those prisoners. He takes Apollo and the rest of Apollo's delegation hostage. Broadcasting to the entire fleet, he demands free elections and a new order. Roslin will not negotiate with terrorists. That works out well for Zarek, because he believes that the sight of Adama sending in troops and the bloodbath that follows will poison the government's reputation, and that then everyone will have no choice but to be free. Apollo gets the upper hand and demands that Zarek call off his rebellion and help suck out the water. But there will be elections, he promises, and Zarek will be able to run in them, or he can die right now by Apollo's hand. Zarek chooses to live. Apollo gets chewed out by his father and by his president. But Apollo is right. The election is due in 8 months, come hell or high water. He's pissed everyone off, but in a mature and thoughtful way. Of course he has. He's Captain Apollo. So, what did you think of Bastille Day, Battlestar Galactica?
I have to say, as Apollo's sort of like the opposite of Shakaar, in that, you know, Shakaar, I'm supposed to think he's cool, but I know I'm going to stop thinking he's cool the more time he spends on screen. But Apollo, I didn't think he was that cool in the first couple of episodes, but man, this episode really sold me on him. His little speech at the end.
Yes. Yeah. So good. Like, that's the rule. And if we throw out the rules, then you're not the president, you're not the admiral. And I don't have any responsibility to either of you.
His source for that, too, is not his instructions. It's just plain his oath. Just plain his oath to defend the Constitution.
Honestly, it really made me think of The West Wing. It was one of my favorite TV speeches ever, is Toby's speech in The West Wing when he finds out about President Bartlett's MS. For 15 minutes, there was a coup in the United States of America. I don't know. And something about Apollo's speech really reminded me of that moment. I don't know.
The politicking in this show is so much more subtle than the politicking we just saw in Deep Space Nine. You have to watch more carefully for the machinations and their significance. And Roslin the way that Rosalind is using Apollo and Apollo is using Rosalind, and the three-way dynamic between them and Adama.
We should remember we are still less than 14 days from the fall of the 12 colonies. So, I suppose it's reasonable that if the topic of elections has come up, people are like, we'll decide that later.
For sure. It's way down the list.
And so, way down the list.
And I think there's a case to be made. Like, you can see where Adama's coming from when he says, democracy is a luxury we can't afford right now. Like, we have so few surviving humans, and the odds are so stacked against us. Right now, we need to be a dictatorship. It's a really, really slippery slope. It's a really fine line, but, like, you can sort of see his logic there, right?
On the other hand, though, last week in Water, he specifically steps up for the idea of separation of military and police when Rosalind asks him to intervene to crush some of the water riots. He's like, I'm not going to be your policeman. But although at the end of the scene, he finally decides to relent and be her policeman. But I feel like he would probably have different answers depending on the day. Like, day 10, guess we better get some democracy. Day 11, water riots. And this, whatever else Zarek has done, and he's done some shitty crap here. Protest is fair and called for in this situation.
Well, I think Zarek is very adept at the part of politics that is knowing when you have leverage and jumping on it. And I think what's cool about this episode is they hand him this golden opportunity. At first, you've got, and I can't remember if it's the previous episode or this episode, but you've got Rosalind and Adama and Apollo arguing about what to do with these prisoners, and says, she says we won't use them as slave labor. He says, give them an opportunity to earn their freedom. There's a suggestion that they just sort of cut them loose from the fleet at some point. So all these other people are arguing about the fate of these prisoners. And of course, the prisoners aren't in the room. And then they make a decision, and they send Apollo and his people over there. And guess what? The people that you were just sitting in a room making decisions about had their own ideas about what they were going to do, which is exactly what's happening, by the way, in the Deep Space Nine episode, right? The people in the halls of power making decisions about the farmers did not consult the farmers. And that really connects to all these themes about democracy, because that's why democracy exists. But I've gotten off on a tangent myself, because then Zarek is the guy who's like, he realized, Apollo walks in and says, here, I'm offering you a chance to earn your freedom. And he realizes that they're being offered crumbs when they have the leverage to demand the steak, because they need them. They don't have anyone else who's going to do this work, to do the water. And he knows that if they didn't need them, they wouldn't be there asking. So he's a savvy operator.
Yeah. And it's so funny when you look at Apollo's first few moves when he talks to the prisoners, because he comes in, he has kind of a spirit of magnanimity. He's like, now everybody, I want you to know you're not slaves. You're going to be able to get freedom points. Ooh. And then he pushes the button that opens every single cell. And to my mind, at that point, like, he deserves anything he gets. Because, like, if you treat people like a group, they will more likely be a group. But if he had gone in, sort of talked individual by individual, it might have gone better for him. He is such a conflicted character because he sort of hates the legacy his father has given him, but he also wants to do good. He wants to do good so bad. He is idealistic and, like, ruthless in equal measure.
But he has a naivete in this episode.
A naivete.
And it really comes through when he talks to Zarek about his book and, his days as a college student reading about revolutionary politics.
Yeah. I read your book, man. I was trying to figure out what kind of outlaw or what kind of dissident Zarek was supposed to be. And I was sort of thinking about Ronald D. Moore and, like, his age, his generation. And I feel like Zarek is the rough equivalent of, like, a guy who blew up some stuff for the Weather Underground, say, and has been in prison throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Like, I feel like that kind of, like, former rebel turned quasi-intellectual, but maybe he's a con man.
Is he a political prisoner? That's an interesting question, right?
It's
Right.
interesting that we get so little information about what his cause was that caused, like,
Yes.
because it doesn't matter at this point. Everyone who was affected by it is presumably dead. But there's, like, tantalizing hints in the episode, and I do not remember if they follow up on those at all later in the show, but, like, when Billy and Dee are talking about him, it's like it's easy to miss, but like there's this like some sort of minority group that was being oppressed.
Right, the Sagittarians.
And Dee is also Sagittarian, right? But
Yes.
she doesn't agree with his aims, and Billy, like, I don't know, that conversation was like so short, but I was really interested in it. I was like, I wish they'd given it a little bit more.
Big time. I understand what they were doing by holding this back. You know, they probably wanted to say, like, you know, this is an emergency situation. We can't get into the past. But I was thinking about how the Sagittarians are presented versus the Bajorans and the Cardassians. And one thing that I think hurts in Battlestar Galactica is I just can't quite tell that Dee and Zarek are from the same culture. Do you know what I mean? Like Bajorans, you know, they believe all different things, but they have the earring, they have the look. And the Battlestar premise seems to be the equivalent of racism in this world is prejudice against people from other worlds. And I feel like it would help if they had figured out a way to represent that more directly.
Yeah.
But that said, I love that conversation where Billy is sort of Sagittarian-splaining Sagittarian culture to a Sagittarian. like that Matt Damon clip where he's like, I haven't seen it, but I guess he's like browbeating a woman about like feminist causes. Definitely somebody is recording that conversation on a phone, ready to post it to YouTube.
And it just so happens that he's white and she's black. That's not what this is
Yes.
about, but the
Yeah,
subtext
yeah.
is undeniably there.
Definitely.
Okay, it says, so it's very brief, even in the Battlestar Galactica wiki. It says, racism against Sagittarians existed even as their opposition to military service offended the wider community in the Cylon War, and their views on medicine stereotyped them as walking plagues.
Right.
Are the 12 colonies named after the Zodiacs?
Pretty much.
You know, that makes a lot of sense, and I don't know why I've never put it together before. Caprica. Yeah, okay.
About half of them are obvious, but I think the ones that we spend time with aren't real. Like Caprica, you know, I wouldn't think it's the Zodiac with that. But like once you get to Sagittarian and Geminon and
Yeah.
all that.
That's probably an inherited holdover from the 70s show. Yeah, where that probably wouldn't have thought twice about that level of sci-fi naming.
Yeah. Although I do like it. It hints that all that astrology stuff came from something that was important at some time, you know? Like it hints that that these words and even these syllables have a longer resonance than we might be aware.
One of the things that my wife and I noticed when we were watching through, not this episode, but I think the pilot movie miniseries, at some point we were like, you know, in most shows, when you have this like really hard, you know, kill some people to save other people moral decisions, that's the whole episode is built around that. But we've had at least 3 in one episode now. Situations where someone's had to make a decision to let someone die in order so that someone else can live. Like, Battlestar is so hardcore about this stuff. It's relentless. People die all the time.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe that tech girl, whose name I don't remember, who's on the ground crew team, I couldn't believe she didn't die. I was so sure Zarek was going to shoot her.
Yeah. Well, he gave her up. That's the thing. Like to tie this into the episode, that is kind of an interesting, like, fast series of events. You know, Zarek and Adama are called in, and Zarek has to be like, look at this. You know, you say this is for high-minded reasons. Callie's been assaulted. I mean, she bit back, but she's going to get killed by this maniac. Is this okay with you? And Zarek is like, you did this. You put this man in the cage. Yeah, definitely this wasn't my fault. Actually, this is a good question. What do you think of Richard Hatch's acting for this part? I think you can see in that moment, he's saying what he basically believes, which is like everything that is wrong with this situation is the fault of the powers that be, not us. But he looks freaked out when he says it. Richard Hatch, of course, played Apollo in the original Battlestar Galactica.
Oh, wow, I didn't realize that. I mean, I think it adds weight, right? It really helps us buy into the narrative that he's a much more sympathetic character, I think, from the get-go than he would be if he didn't have that kind of gravitas. Because he's painted a lot more like Shakaar, but in the end, Shakaar is a hero, and this guy is not.
Yeah, I feel like the episode wouldn't really work if Zarek was like a goon, if he was like a bruiser, like Bane. That would not. It just wouldn't.
I can break your soul, Apollo.
And I'm sure it was tempting to go that direction, but having him be like charismatic and likable and heroic definitely works better.
Do you find him that heroic in this?
Well, when I say heroic, I mean the kind of cinematic shorthand for heroic. He looks like a hero.
Right.
And he talks like a hero.
Yeah.
And he thinks of himself as a hero.
I almost find him a charisma vacuum, Tom Zarek, but in kind of a fascinating way. Like he is just so implacable to me. Like he almost looks shockingly normal for a man who is talked about as larger than life. And I guess when you get down to it, the rhetoric that he has does not seem that inspiring to me. He's like, we're going to be free men and women. Okay, fine. He's like, Apollo, your name is like a Greek god. Like, yeah, I noticed. It's not, I don't know, but maybe that's on purpose though. Like maybe they're trying to say he has a reputation, but at this point, after 20 years in prison, he is just mostly an operator.
Yeah, and he's kind of like Kai Wynn, right?
Kind of like Kai Wynn,
he's got a thing that he stands for, and then he's got an agenda that he's really after. And sometimes, I think his call for elections is not just about how much he loves democracy. I think it's a ploy to make his cause more sympathetic.
In the climactic scene where Apollo makes the deal, I feel like he does, despite having a cool gun in his face and everything, he also does basically solid diplomacy. Because, if you look over it, he gets everything he wants. They're going to do the labor job. He gives them the democracy, which he wants anyway. So he gave him something that Zarek wanted, that Apollo also wanted. He also lets Zarek keep the Astral Queen without any defenses or food. They're dependent on the fleet. But he gives Zarek a way to take this deal and walk away without seeming to lose face. So I was kind of impressed just as a negotiator. This is cowboy diplomacy, Kirk style, to a degree. But it's also actually pretty solid diplomatic work, I think. And the only downside really is that Zarek now is free to be a power player. But
at the end of the episode, is Zarek even free? Or is he still in?
He seems to be captain of the
right.
Astral
They've
Queen
freed
ship.
the Astral Queen as a unit, but they're not letting them just go on to any other ship willy nilly.
No, he's got his own island to an extent.
That's interesting.
Khan would approve, I'm sure.
I think it's interesting in the 2 episodes where we've been talking about water and the water supply. We have like this tiny foil / microcosm of Ty and his whiskey supply, which the fleet's got to figure out how to manage their water for everybody, but Ty's got to figure out how to manage his whiskey for Ty, and he takes it just as seriously. Yeah. And I feel like that tells us a lot about his sort of simultaneously discipline and lack of discipline, and also that collective trauma, right? Now we see how he's dealing with it. I'm sure lots of other people are too. But then, so that doesn't immediately appear to have a lot to do with his little conflict with Starbuck. But it totally does, right? because, like, he seems to be upset that she's not doing things by the book. And here he is, like, doing this thing that is very much not by the book and even showing up for work drunk. So he's a little bit of a hypocrite.
Isn't Starbuck's conflict with Ty kind of the same as Adama and Rosalind's in a way? Like, they're both about, to what extent do we hold on to the rules when the situation is so completely beyond anything that the rules were designed for, right? Like, as Adama and Rosalind are trying to figure out, okay, do we have elections? You know, Starbuck knows that being a hard ass and, you know, treating her pilots in this totally professional manner isn't going to work right now. There's no end in sight. There's no downtime. Like, if we do everything like this very professional military unit, we're just going to burn out. So she's intentionally kind of joking around with them, having fun, you know, trying to build more camaraderie, maybe faster than she normally would. And Ty is, like, not adaptable at all. You know, he wants to do things the way he's always done them. So I don't know. It just feels like it's almost an inverse, because Adama is the one who thinks that, you know, we need to bend. And then ultimately Apollo is the one who's like, no, this is the law, these are the rules. I don't know. It's kind of feels connected.
That makes her resolution with Ty kind of interesting. You know, throughout this first few episodes, she has been relentlessly attacking him over his alcoholism. But she ends this episode giving him some water and saying, I have problems too. If she is adapting to what the pilots need, maybe she's decided to adapt to what her XO needs as well. Even though, you know, as the one with the authority, he should sort of be the one to set the tone for these kinds of things. I'm a fan of Starbuck in this episode. I always thought she was awesome in these earlier ones, but this might be the first time I actually like her and want to hang out with her as well. It's good. I like the fighting with Ty and everything, but it's not, you know, Starbuck is the cool anti-authoritarian. And it's not always cool just to be like, you're drunk. You know, she is always formidable, but she can do other things as well. Including, I loved when she was like, good to see you, Baltar. Oh, really? No. Like, she was doing that in a friendly way, as well as in an aggressive way. A friendly, aggressive way. Maybe,
I feel like her decision to just shoot Zarek was very telling about her as well. And it's interesting because Deep Space Nine also had a moment where someone just fired a gun without waiting for orders.
Well, what's cool about Bastille Day in that sense is you can hear Callie screaming, and then it cuts to Starbuck and she goes, hear that? They've started killing the hostages. Like, she's wrong, but you understand why she has assumed the worst.
And she's just like watching Lee, but she can't hear what he's saying. She's like, Lee, what are you doing?
Yeah. And that's why I think this episode is so good at doing something that Trek could never quite manage, showing how things are almost falling apart. It's like Star Trek is like a Shakespeare play, you know what I mean? And Battlestar is, I don't know what, maybe it's like documentary theater or something.
Well, it's like in Shakaar, you know, the election is the last 2 minutes of the episode, and we never actually see it. And there's no drama around the election itself. You know, it's a foregone conclusion at the end of the episode that Shakaar is going to be the first minister. Whereas in Battlestar Galactica, the decision to have the election is the end of the episode, and then the election itself is going to be looming for, you know, the rest of the season. Like, it gives it a lot more time for things to have, like, weight and consequences, which makes it easier, I think, to build tension. Yeah, Deep Space Nine is serialized compared with other Star Trek of the time, but, like, it also, I don't know, both shows, Battlestar Galactica is still pretty episodic in its own way compared to
this year.
Today.
It definitely is.
TV has just gotten so much more, like, steadily less episodic and more serial. Like,
I feel like it's gone too far in that direction.
it has, but BSG is later than Deep Space Nine in that progression, but earlier than now, right?
You know, sometimes people are intimidated coming on this podcast because they feel like they'll get lost with Battlestar. But if you compare Battlestar to Game of Thrones, like, it's the easiest watch.
Yeah.
Or The Wire.
Or Obi-Wan.
Like, it God, all the Disney
I was
Mandalorian,
going to say Stranger Things.
Boba Fett.
Streaming has ruined television. Get off my lawn.
Streaming has ruined.
Because I was like, well, no, because I was thinking about Stranger Things, because the thing everyone is talking about is like, why are the episodes 2 hours long? And it's like, really though, why are the episodes 2 hours long when most of them don't have like an episode plot anyway? Why not just make twice as many of them?
Or why not just make the entire show one long episode? There are no rules anymore. That's what I say.
Like, I feel like, for better or worse, we will always know the Deep Space Nine characters more than the Battlestar characters, because we got to hang out with them more. Whereas Battlestar, everyone was kind of always on being put through the ringer in some way.
Yeah, like, as much as Ronald Moore was frustrated that he couldn't do more with Voyager, I don't know if I would have liked Voyager if it had been as dark as he wanted it to be.
I agree. You know, he has a habit of spitting on Voyager in a way that has become irritating to me, given all that he has been able to do. Because it's like, they went a different way than you, okay, Ron? Come on.
Well,
it's still valid to do a show
balance
where, like, people are the
The
best.
frustration with Voyager is that it goes to great lengths to set up a premise that it then almost immediately begins ignoring. Like,
Sure, the Maquis and tension.
yeah, and the fact that they're out there and they have limited supplies. Everything that would have made Voyager... I like Voyager, but I understand this criticism. Yeah. Everything that should have made Voyager unique and different from the Next Generation was quickly ignored and swept under a rug. And I think that's sort of where Ron Moore was like, but what if we did only have a certain number of shuttles? Wouldn't that be crazy?
Yeah. We're running out of time. I just want to tell this Richard Hatch story for a second. As you might know, you probably don't know Jonah, but I'm sure you remember Nathan. Original Battlestar fans were not happy with this reboot. They did that thing where they were severely angry at it for 2 years before it premiered. Ronald D. Moore kind of leaned into that. Basically, the original Battlestar fans saw him as like a Hollywood fool, so on and so forth. So Ronald D. Moore goes to the Galacticon, Battlestar Galactic Convention. He shows 5 minutes of scenes from the miniseries, and he goes up to take questions. It is universally condemned and hated. Constant booing. And he basically gets asked the same question like 10 times, which is, how could you do this? How could you make this show that we love into Hollywood crap, you Hollywood crapmeister? Someone flat out asks him, like, just please, if you go to series, won't you please commit to doing it the old way? And he's honest. He's like, no, I'm sorry. This is what we want to do. Giant boos. Suddenly, a man steps out of the crowd. Ronald didn't know he was in the audience. It's Richard Hatch himself. And he goes, wait a second. This isn't what I would do with a show, but you have to show some respect for Ronald D. Moore. He's our guest. He came here. He shouldn't be treated like this. The crowd harumphed and was less hostile at that point. So they met up at backstage, I guess, and Moore was like, thanks, I really appreciated you doing that. Because this series was Glenn Larson, the creator of Battlestar, flat out said he didn't like what they were doing. Dirk Benedict, who played Starbuck, was a complete ass in a way I'll cover in another episode of this podcast. But Richard Hatch, he was like, I'm not into this for now, but I'm willing to listen. And that they came to know each other, and that's how this kind of started. And, you know, even Richard Hatch has said, we wanted to do it darker in the 70s, but we weren't allowed. So I think they ended up kind of at a meeting of the minds. In a very Star Trek way, if you don't mind me saying so.
Yeah.
My only experience with the 70s show is I watched like a bunch of it when they marathoned it on Sci-Fi Channel. I was at my grandmother's house. I was very young. I barely remember any of it. And I never have gone back to it.
It's not memorable. If you remember it, it tends to remind you of watching Star Wars. Like, it's really, I mentioned this in another episode, but they, not George Lucas, but the studio sued Battlestar Galactica for plagiarism. And you might think, well, that's a little silly. I mean, this is all for Flash Gordon anyway. But if you watch a couple of those episodes of those 70s show, you kind of get it. Like, they're ripping off, like, Leia's hairstyle.
Yeah.
It's really sad. And, you know, there's talent there. You know, especially when you consider where sci-fi was in those days. But it's all like wrapped in plastic. It can't get above a certain level.
I do remember John Colicos though.
John Colicos
from the original Star Trek and Deep Space Nine, the Klingon, is Gaius Baltar.
Oh, he was in it.
In the original.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool.
Which is why I think it would have been... Unfortunately, they already used him as Picard's dad in Picard. But I think it would have been, like, hilariously poetic to have James Callis play Kor on Strange New Worlds. Like, that would have been, like, the ultimate wraparound. Yeah, probably not going to happen.
The theme of this episode has been People's Champions, Deep Space Nine, Shakaar, Battlestar Galactica, Bastille Day. So in your opinion... this week, who wins? Who has the better episode when it comes to the theme of Champions of the People?
Do you want to go first, Nathan?
I'm torn, because I think if that's, like, the theme we're judging on, maybe Shakaar is, like, the better episode, but, like, in terms of, like, pure quality of the episode, I think Bastille Day is definitely the better episode. So, if only purely for Apollo's speech at the end.
It is a good speech.
Yeah, I don't know. 90s Trek is so bizarre. Like, you forget this if you grew up with it and you love it like we do. But, like, it's extremely economical compared to modern television. I was, like,
yes,
wowed by that when I was thinking about how quickly everything happens in Shakaar. Like, that episode takes place over a number of weeks, and it just skips over from, like, oh, now Kira's joining the Resistance. Oh, now they've been running for weeks. Now there's an election. And it's like, everything, it's like everything, there's exactly enough dialogue to tell you. And Battlestar, you know, they can take their time, and it makes it feel a little more lived in, a little more realistic, so... kind of apples and oranges, but I feel like the quality of the writing and the acting in the dramatic scenes in Bastille Day was just, like, quite a bit above the equivalent in Shakaar, which is not a knock to Deep Space Nine, because clearly Deep Space Nine has had episodes that have had, like, really knocked that part out of the park, but this was not one of those episodes. Other than that scene between Kylin and Sisko, which was actually quite remarkably good, but...
Yeah, I guess I would agree. I would say, you know, the Battlestar episode, Bastille Day, was very compelling. But old Apollo / Tom Zarek was not the most compelling part of it. Young Apollo was. It was a real shining moment for Leodama, and I meant to say this earlier, but they really set us up to think he's just going to be a meathead hotshot pilot guy. And he turns out to be so much more complicated than that. And the fact that now he's part of the kind of civilian side in this brewing conflict. It's really interesting. I mean, they really, like, leveled up his character, and he kind of surprises us, and there's nothing like that in Deep Space Nine, you know. Kira, and that's often just sort of a flaw of Star Trek in general. When it comes to your regulars, what you see is what you get. They rarely make decisions that surprise you. And, you know, Kira does what Kira's going to do. And we're maybe a little surprised by the ending they pull off and how they're able to bully Kai Wynn out of running for office. But but you know, Battlestar Galactica is really, it's early in the show, and it's dripping out its character development, and it manages to really keep you on your toes, which was without doing anything that's, you know, out of character or just for shock value. So
Leodama is certainly an interesting character, and I think, you know, he is arguably one of the most idealistic and moral characters on the show, but it doesn't always come across that way, because he is often acting in opposition to his daddy. Do you know what I mean? Like he has a moral compass, but he also, I guess if you've seen the miniseries recently, like that first scene between the two of them is almost skin crawling. Like he sounds like such a teenager. Like, those words were meant to hurt, Dad.
He's got a chip on his shoulder.
And it's like an extremely huge chip. And the fact that he can go, like, in a way, what he's doing is kind of teenage too. Like they have Adama and Rosalind as kind of a surrogate mom and dad type. And this whole episode, they're like, choose a side. But what he does is he creates a third side and then chooses that.
He walks the tightrope. He figures out how to make everybody happy.
Yeah, and unhappy.
And everyone equally unhappy.
That's my favorite part. Do you remember that last scene where he's explaining this plan, and it cuts to Adama, and Adama's glasses are off, and he's looking through the window, and he just looks completely filled with icy rage. He's like, I know what my son's about to say. I know he's kind of right, but I hate it. Like, it's just such great, silent, angry acting.
I'm gonna say
Deep
something
Space
like,
Nine, I will say, they also kind of have a difficult situation and find like a third way. It's just a little less.
They're good at that too.
It's a little less obvious, but Major Kira's either got to essentially arrest her friend who saved her life, or disobey an order from her Kai and her first minister, and she manages to but she does it in a distinctly Kira way that involves a little more bullying.
I mean, it's really quite a miracle that Kira has not been cashiered out of the Bajoran militia several times over at this point. But...
Yeah, you know what it is. She's loyal. People respect that,
and she's a war hero in her own right? She the liberation of Galatep or whatever as.
And there's definitely a reading of the show where her posting on Deep Space Nine is basically an effort to get her out of the way, put her somewhere.
She says in the pilot, like, that's. I guess that's why they sent me here. What can I say?
Everyone on Deep Space Nine is there, has been foisted there, except for Bashir, who's the psychopath who actually wants to be there.
I mean, like, Kira is, she's too popular for them to, like, they don't want her making trouble, but they also don't want to, like, actively, work against her. Sisko and Kira's relationship is definitely unique, I will say.
Yes.
In all of Star Trek, I think. There's a lot of different, like, Captain Exa dynamics, but the way that Sisko and Kira's relationship evolves from this kind of extreme antagonism to, like, respect to friendship is pretty cool.
Janeway and Chakotay could have been that if the Voyager writers hadn't been such cowards. He comes around way too quickly.
Yeah.
It's true. I mean, and with Kira and Sisko, it's like, you're a god. You're a god.
Well, yeah, she does not know how to handle
she's
that.
Also, like, absolutely terrible at, like, following orders from anyone, right? And Sisko is contending with, like, I feel like Sisko plays Garak and Quark at various points very skillfully by just knowing how they'll act in their own self-interests. And he kind of does that with Kira, too. He sort of wields her against the Bajorans because he knows that she'll do her own thing.
Yeah.
Sisko's a smooth operator.
He's a very smooth operator, which makes him good at his job. And Kira, the other thing about Kira is that while she is, she is stubborn, she is also very open-minded in a way that I'm not sure all Bajorans... Like, Duet is an early classic of the series, obviously. But, like, by the end of that, she's going, you're a good man. And, that's the thing. Like, she's always either 100% one way or 100% the other way. And she can switch, like, without any hesitation. Like, if she knows she's been wrong, she'll, like, flip instantly and authentically.
Yeah, Kira's actually able to overcome her anti-Cardassian racism in a way that Chief O'Brien never really is, which is kind of sad considering like how much worse the Cardassians were to her than they were to him.
I know. It's that I love that aspect of her. It's completely fascinating.
Like, she 100%
and
embraces Zial, who is not only a Cardassian, but
Yes.
like Hitler's daughter.
Yes,
Like,
yes.
she's just like 100% there for Zial. Like,
Well,
does
Zial
that.
is as
Yeah.
much a Bajoran as she is a Cardassian, even though I think it's harder for us to see because we focus on the alien. But
Well, she's another. I mean, I think Kira would see her as another victim of Ducat's cruelty and negligence. You know, but it's still hard. I mean, just playing that Cardassian facial structure would be hard. After 50 years of occupation, you could understand Kira having a harder time with it than she does. Like the fact that she is secretly one of the most open-minded and interstellarly minded Bajorans.
And then
that
her
we
like her
see.
friendship with Tekeni Gamor later on as well.
Yeah,
Like-
that was cool.
Yeah, she's actually
That was
totally
really
open to individual Cardassians being good people while still hating
Yeah.
Ducat and to some extent Garrick.
Yeah, and I just love how she never forgives Ducat. Like, it would be so easy for them to go, well, you have to forgive Ducat because blah, 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 blah. And it's like, no, sometimes you cross that line. But other Cardassians, you know, she will
She doesn't forgive Damar either, but she still is willing
Right.
to help him.
Right.
All right, guys.
And it's, yes, I'm sorry, we have to go. I think I forgot to mention, but I vote for Battlestar Galactica as well. Battlestar Galactica wins this week. Next week, tune in for our episodes Act of Contrition of Battlestar Galactica and Soldiers of the Empire from Deep Space Nine on the theme of getting back up from when you've been knocked down. Thank you very much, Nathan. Thank you very much, Jonah.
Thanks for
We'd
having
love to
us.
have you
It's
again.
been a pleasure.
We will see you in the future.